Secrets behind closed doors.
Before we begin this chilling story, please consider liking and subscribing to my channel. Don't forget to click the bell icon and let me know in the comments what you liked about the story.
I still remember the first picture. It was tucked away in an old, dusty photo album hidden in the attic. The pages were yellowed with time, filled with snapshots of smiles that seemed too perfect, too wide. The eyes in those photos sparkled, but something was unsettling behind them, something I couldn't quite place at the time. I was only 10 years old, too young to understand that a smile could hide so much. Back then, everything in my life seemed perfect, or at least, it was supposed to be. We lived in a quaint suburban neighborhood where every house looked like it was pulled from a postcard. Our home was the kind of place that seemed to breathe happiness. Bright blue shutters framed the windows, a cheerful flower garden bloomed by the front porch, and a swing set sat in the yard. The swing squeaked whenever you went too high, but my dad, Mark, always said that squeaking was a sign of good luck. My mom, Laura, was the heart of our home, always cooking up something delicious, while my little sister, Lily, and I played outside. Every Sunday, without fail, we gathered around the dining table for a family dinner. My mom would make her famous spaghetti, and the savory aroma would fill every corner of the house. We laughed over silly things like how Dad could never seem to find his car keys, or how Lily insisted that our cat, Mr. Whiskers, understood everything we said. Those were the moments that felt like pure, uncomplicated joy. I thought they would last forever. But even then, beneath the laughter and love, there were cracks in the foundation of our seemingly perfect life. It started with whispers. I'd catch my parents talking in hushed tones, their faces tense until they noticed me nearby. Their smiles would return, but they were too wide, like they were trying to convince me and themselves that everything was fine. But I could feel the tension, thick in the air like a fog, pressing down on me even though I didn't fully understand it. At the time, I chalked it up to adult problems, things kids like me didn't need to worry about. Then there was our neighbor, Mrs. Carson, an elderly woman who lived 2 doors down. She always smiled at us, but her smiles were heavy, almost sad. One day, as she walked her small, scruffy dog past our house, I overheard her say to another neighbor, "You know, they're not as nice as they seem." The way her words hung in the air sent a shiver down my spine. I didn't know what she meant at the time, but I couldn't shake the uneasiness that settled in the pit of my stomach. Still, I brushed it all aside. I was a kid, and kids weren't supposed to worry about such things. But that nagging feeling kept growing, like a shadow I couldn't escape. One afternoon, Lily and I were playing hide and seek in the house, running from room to room. It was my turn to hide, so I darted down to the basement, hoping to find a spot that would keep me hidden for a while. As I moved a stack of old boxes out of the way, I noticed a door I had never seen before. It was tucked into the far corner of the basement, almost completely obscured. The doorknob was old and cold, and when I tried to turn it, it rattled but didn't budge. Curiosity buzzed in my mind, but I hesitated, afraid of getting in trouble for snooping. When I asked my mom about the door later, her smile faltered for just a second before returning with that same too-bright cheerfulness. "Oh, it's just old junk," she said, her voice light and breezy. But I didn't believe her. Something in the way she brushed off my question felt wrong. I could feel it deep inside me. There was more behind that door than just forgotten items. Things got stranger after I met Tommy, a new kid who moved into the neighborhood that summer. He lived down the street, and we became fast friends. Tommy was a tough kid, always climbing trees, scraping his knees, and daring me to race bikes. But his family, they were different. His dad was strict, barking orders, and his mom was quiet, always looking lost in thought. One day, as we swung back and forth on the old swing set in my yard, Tommy leaned in and lowered his voice. "My parents don't like me hanging out with you," he said, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. "They say your family is different." "What do you mean?" I asked, laughing it off. But Tommy's expression didn't change. "I've seen things," he said quietly. "At night, in the woods, people doing things." He shuddered. I laughed again, but it felt hollow. Kids make up stories all the time, right? But Tommy's words lingered, echoing in my mind long after he went home. That night, I asked my parents if we could go camping, hoping to catch a glimpse of whatever Tommy had seen. But they brushed off my suggestion with those same wide smiles. "Maybe next time, buddy," Dad said, ruffling my hair. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Then Tommy didn't show up for school. One day turned into two, and by the third day, I knew something was wrong. I waited for him by the swings, looking down the street for his familiar figure, hoping to see him riding his bike toward me. But he never came. When I asked my parents if they'd seen him, they exchanged a glance before shaking their heads. "Kids go missing sometimes, Jake," Dad said, his tone too casual. "It's a scary world out there." That night, I lay in bed, listening to the creaks and groans of our house. The darkness felt alive, pressing in around me. I couldn't stop thinking about Tommy, about his strange warnings, and about the locked door in our basement. My heart pounded as I made a decision. I had to find out what my parents were hiding. I waited until late that night until I was sure my parents were asleep. Quietly, I tiptoed to the basement and grabbed the chair from the corner to reach the top shelf of the closet, where I knew my dad kept spare keys. My hands trembled as I unlocked the door. It swung open with a creak, revealing a room shrouded in darkness. I flicked on the light, and the sight before me sent a cold wave of fear through my body. The room was filled with old toys and children's clothes, but there was something else: strange symbols drawn on the floor in a perfect circle. And then I heard it. A low, melodic whisper, faint but growing louder, echoing off the walls. My heart raced. I backed away, terror gripping me as I slammed the door shut. I ran back upstairs, trying to act normal, but sleep didn't come that night. I couldn't forget what I had seen, and couldn't shake the growing suspicion that my family was hiding something dark and dangerous. The weeks that followed were a blur of tension and fear. My parents became more controlling, always watching and always smiling, but their love felt suffocating. They began making cryptic comments about how family is the most important thing, and how the world outside was full of danger. One night I overheard them whispering again, this time talking about a special family event. Their words were too low for me to hear clearly, but I caught the words sacrifice and preparation. My stomach twisted in knots as I realized they were planning something, and that something involved me and Lily. I couldn't stay any longer. I had to get Lily out. Late one night, I crept into her room, but the door was locked. Panic surged through me. "Lily," I whispered, knocking softly. But there was no answer. Desperate, I ran to the basement, hoping to find a way out. As I pushed open the door, I froze. The symbols on the floor were glowing faintly, pulsing like a heartbeat. The air was thick and heavy with an energy that made my skin crawl. Suddenly, I heard a voice, my father's, low and sweet, coming from the top of the stairs. "Come here, son. We need to talk about family." I turned to see both my parents standing there, their faces twisted into wide, unnatural smiles. "You don't want to disappoint us," Dad said softly. Everything shattered at that moment. I screamed for Lily as I bolted from the basement. I found her, terrified, and we ran out into the night, into the dark, whispering woods where the shadows seemed to reach for us. And behind us, I could still hear their laughter. Lily's small hand trembled in mine as we sprinted into the thick woods behind our house. The trees seemed to close in around us, their branches clawing at our clothes, scratching our skin. The night was eerily silent, save for the sound of our ragged breathing and the crunch of leaves beneath our feet. Behind us, I could hear faint, twisted echoes of my parents' voices. They were calling our names, but the sweetness in their tones was gone, replaced by something darker, more menacing. "Jake," Lily panted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm scared." I squeezed her hand tighter. "I know, Lil, but we have to keep moving. We can't stop." I had no idea where we were going, only that we had to get as far away from the house and our parents as possible. The deeper we went into the woods, the colder it became, as if the darkness itself was swallowing the warmth from the air. Fear gnawed at me, but I couldn't let it consume me. Not now. Not with Lily depending on me. We stumbled over roots and rocks, the forest growing denser with each step. I glanced back, half expecting to see my parents' twisted smiles glowing in the shadows, but all I saw was darkness. It was almost worse, not knowing where they were, but knowing they were coming. They always found a way. After what felt like hours of running, we burst into a small clearing, bathed in the faint light of the moon. I stopped for a moment, trying to catch my breath. My legs ached, and my heart pounded in my chest like a drum. Lily collapsed beside me, gasping for air, her face pale with exhaustion. "Do you think they're still following us?" she asked, her wide eyes scanning the trees. "I don't know," I admitted, my voice shaky. "But we can't stay here for long. We need to—" Before I could finish, a sudden rustling in the bushes behind us sent a shock of fear through my body. I grabbed Lily's arm, pulling her to her feet. "We have to go," I hissed. But as I turned toward the woods, something stopped me. Standing at the edge of the clearing was Tommy. He looked different, pale, almost ghost-like, his eyes sunken and hollow. His clothes were torn, and dirt smudged his face, but there was no mistaking him. "Tommy?" I whispered, barely believing my eyes. He didn't move, didn't speak. He just stood there, staring at us, his eyes wide with something I couldn't decipher. Fear? Pain? I took a step forward, my heart racing. "Tommy! What happened to you?" But before I could reach him, his head snapped to the side, his gaze shifting toward the darkness behind us. "They're coming," he whispered, his voice hoarse and broken. "You can't outrun them. No one can." A chill ran down my spine. I glanced back at Lily, who was frozen in place, her eyes locked on Tommy. "We have to go, Jake," she pleaded, tugging at my sleeve. But I couldn't move. Tommy's words had rooted me to the spot, fear coursing through my veins like ice. "Tommy, what do you mean? Who's coming?" His expression twisted into something close to despair. "Your parents," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "They've been doing this for years. The woods. It's where they take the others." "What others?" I demanded, my voice trembling. "What are you talking about?" But before he could answer, a sound echoed through the clearing, a low, melodic hum, the same whispering melody I had heard in the basement. The hair on the back of my neck stood on end. I turned to face the source of the sound, my heart thudding painfully in my chest. And that's when I saw them. My parents stood at the edge of the clearing, their faces illuminated by the pale moonlight. Their eyes glowed with an unnatural light, their smiles wide and twisted, stretching too far across their faces. But it wasn't just them. Behind them, in the shadows of the trees, were others' figures that I couldn't quite make out, but I knew instinctively they were the missing people Tommy had warned me about. They were all there, staring at us with hollow eyes, like marionettes waiting for their strings to be pulled. "You shouldn't have run, Jake," my mother said, her voice sweet but laced with something venomous. "We only wanted to keep you safe. You and Lily both." My father nodded, his grin unnaturally wide. "Family is everything, son. Everything. You should have trusted us." Lily clung to my arm, her body shaking. "Jake, please," she whimpered. "Please don't let them take us." I stepped in front of her, my heart pounding in my ears. "Stay away from us," I shouted, my voice cracking with fear. "We're not going back with you." But my parents didn't stop. They moved forward, slow and deliberate, their footsteps silent on the soft grass. The figures behind them seemed to sway in unison, like shadows moving in the wind, their eyes locked on us. "Don't fight it, Jake," my mother said softly, her voice almost hypnotic. "This is how it's meant to be. You were born for this." "For what?" I demanded, anger rising in my chest. "What are you talking about?" My father's smile widened, if that was even possible. "Sacrifice, son. The ultimate gift to the family." The word sent a jolt of terror through me. Sacrifice. That's what they had been planning all along. Not just for me, but for Lily, too. My mind raced as I backed away, pulling Lily with me. There had to be a way out, some escape from the nightmare closing in around us. But the woods felt alive, the trees closing in, trapping us. And then I remembered the old trail that led to the highway. It wasn't far, just beyond the clearing. If we could make it there, maybe, just maybe, we'd have a chance. "Lily," I whispered, "when I say run, you run as fast as you can. Don't look back, okay?" Her eyes filled with tears, but she nodded. "Okay." I turned my gaze back to my parents, who were now just feet away, their eyes glowing brighter, their smiles wider. The figures behind them began to move forward, their shadowy forms blending into the night. "Now!" I shouted, grabbing Lily's hand and bolting toward the edge of the clearing. We ran, our feet pounding the ground, branches whipping at our faces as we tore through the trees. I could hear them behind us, the whispers, the laughter, the twisted melody growing louder and louder. But we didn't stop. We couldn't stop. The trail appeared ahead of us, a narrow strip of dirt leading to the highway. I could see the faint glow of headlights in the distance. Freedom. Safety. Just as we reached the trail, I felt a hand grab my shoulder, cold and strong. I stumbled, but Lily pulled me up, her strength surprising me. "Come on, Jake!" she screamed, her voice filled with desperation. I scrambled to my feet, and we ran, the sounds of pursuit growing fainter behind us. The highway was just ahead now, cars speeding past, oblivious to the terror unfolding in the woods. We burst from the trees, out onto the asphalt, and for a brief moment, everything was still. The night air was cool against my skin, the world silent except for the distant hum of traffic. We had made it. I don't remember much after that. A truck driver spotted us on the side of the road, his headlights cutting through the darkness. He stopped, asking if we were okay, but all I could do was collapse beside Lily, exhausted and broken. The police came, and when I tried to explain what had happened, no one believed me. My parents had disappeared without a trace, and the authorities chalked it up to a simple case of runaways. They found no evidence of the strange figures or the glowing symbols in the basement. To them, it was just the imagination of a scared kid. But I knew the truth. I had seen the darkness behind the smiles, the twisted evil that had consumed my family. Even now, years later, I can still hear the whispers in my dreams and feel the cold grip of their hands on my skin. I escaped that night, but the scars remain, buried deep beneath the surface. And sometimes, in the dead of night, I wake to the sound of faint laughter, my parents' voices calling me home.